Hi, my name is Dariush Mozaffarian. I'm a cardiologist and director of the Food Medicine Institute at Tufts University. I'm going to be talking to you about what's in food, the roles of diverse food biomolecules for human health. So the place to start, why do we care so much about this, is that we are really facing a 21st century pandemic of diet-related diseases. 40% of US adults have some form of cardiovascular disease, 50% have diabetes or prediabetes, 75% have overweight or obesity. And beyond those diseases, there's so many other diet-related diseases that aren't even included in that list. Cancers, cognitive decline, fatty liver disease, poor gut health, vascular dysfunction, mood disorders, autism, allergies, and just general unhealthy aging. So really, understanding the relevance of food for health could not be more important to consider. So how do we think about protective foods and the biomolecules in them? The way I think about it is of three broad categories of foods. There's foods that have benefit, that are protective foods. There's foods that are more neutral, and there's foods that are seriously harmful. And so at the top, the protective foods are fruits, nuts, fish, vegetables, plant oils, whole grains, beans, and yogurt. These have thousands and thousands of bioactive molecules that really influence our health, and also fermentable fibers, which influence our gut microbiome's health. Also, some of these foods, as we'll talk about, have specific bioactives like fish and omega-3 fatty acids, and yogurt, which has probiotics and menaquinones. Then there are foods to eat in moderation. These are mostly minimally processed animal foods. They do have macronutrients and more traditional vitamins and minerals, but they don't have that wealth of thousands of polyphenols and other bioactives and fermentable fibers that in the very protective foods. And then the worst things in the diet are the highly processed foods that have been stripped of most of these benefits, the processed grains, starches, and sugars. And I really want to emphasize processed grains and starches because that's about 30% of calories in the US food supply and is just as harmful as added sugars. So at the top, as I mentioned, what the real value of these foods are that we're learning is fermentable fibers, which serve as prebiotics for our gut bacteria. And then these bioactive phytonutrients that serve also as prebiotics for our gut bacteria, but also as bioactives for our own health. These are microbiome nurturing foods that give rise to life. And then at the bottom, the reason these foods are so unhealthful is they're loaded with acellular starches, sugars, and proteins. They're depleted of fibers and phytonutrients, and they have harmful additives like salt and other preservatives, sweeteners, flavorings, colors, emulsifiers, and thickeners. So let's turn to those bioactives, those fermentable fibers and polyphenols and other nutrients that are so important. One way to think about them is these are trace natural compounds found in foods beyond established macronutrients, vitamins, and minerals that produce meaningful physiologic effects relevant to human health. There have been many, many bioactives that have been demonstrated to have benefits in human trials and randomized trials of important risk factors and even clinical endpoints. As a general rule, how are you going to increase your daily intake of these? The most important way is to eat more minimally processed, bioactive-rich plant foods. We still need to understand better how to consider food fortification or supplements to increase bioactives. And also, could optimization of certain crop breeding or farming practices, let's say organic or regenerative agriculture or other crop breeding practices, be focused on increasing these bioactives? So let's give you some examples. Let's make this real. So, we know from many studies that extra virgin olive oil is good for our health. And of course, the major constituent is oleic acid, a healthy monounsaturated fatty acids. But we are learning that beyond the fatty acids, there are these, again, bioactives in olive oil. And one of them is oleocanthal. This molecule is what gives the burning in the back of your throat when you have extra virgin olive oil. And the reason that burning in the back of your throat feels kind of similar to what happens if you've ever chewed an uncoated aspirin and you get that same burning in the back of your throat. The reason those sensations are so similar is because oleocanthal binds the same COX-2 receptors in the throat and throughout the body that aspirin binds to. And so estimates have shown that in Mediterranean populations that have a lot of extra virgin olive oil, they're having a similar amount of aspirin-like activity of a baby aspirin, but distributed naturally over the whole day. And so oleocanthal produces these same anti-inflammatory positive effects as aspirin. Now, Plant oils and plant foods have so many bioactives. This is, the list is on, and we're not going to be able to go into all of these, but flavonoids are particularly important. And so these are present in apples and citrus fruits and certain vegetables, seeds and grains. Cocoa has really, well-known cocoa flavonols that reduce blood pressure and improve endothelial function. Tea and coffee, berries, and grapes and wines. So flavonoids are another really important type of plant bioactives. I'm going to give you another example though. It's not all in plant foods that these bioactives are present. So menaquinones are quite interesting. These are fermentation bioactives that are produced only by the action of bacteria. And so when you take foods like cheese or yogurt or other foods that have vitamin K in them, the bacteria during fermentation, during the production of the food by fermentation, the bacteria convert vitamin K1 to vitamin K2, which is a unique form of vitamin K2 not produced by mammals. We've shown in our studies, and others have shown, that cheese intake, for example, which is the top source of menaquinones in the US diet, is linked to lower risk of diabetes. And that's maybe a surprising finding, but in the last couple of years, there have been 2 randomized controlled double-blind trials showing that menaquinone supplementation with menaquinone 7 or MK7 significantly improves hemoglobin A1C among patients with diabetes. And so this provides pretty strong confirmatory evidence that there's value to these bioactives that are in fermented foods like cheese. Another set of bioactives are actually fatty acids. We know about saturated fats and polyunsaturated fats and monounsaturated fats generally, but fatty acids are actually a large class of molecules that span a wide domain of fatty acid chain lengths, locations of bonds, and so on. And dietary fats are not just carriers of calories. We think of fat and we think of storage of energy, but dietary fats are incredibly bioactive molecules that have a range of effects on the body. And I want to give you even some examples of some bioactives that we're just discovering in the fatty acid space. Milk normally, the fat in milk normally has a ring of phospholipids and sphingolipids around it called milk fat globule membrane. This shown in green in this electron microscopy scan, shown in bright green in the whipped cream. You see these green rings around the red fat globules. This is what helps the fat be soluble in the liquid of the milk. And so, for example, if you buy raw milk, you notice that the fat rises to the top. That's because the milk fat globule membrane, these phospholipids and sphingolipids, are separating the fat from the liquid. When you make butter, one of the things you do is you destroy and remove this milk fat globule membrane, because otherwise the fat won't pack together to make butter. And so you actually take out and throw away often these phospholipids and sphingolipids in the form of buttermilk. Buttermilk is actually discarded milk fat globule membrane. And so we've known from studies from many decades ago that the phospholipids and sphingolipids in this milk fat globule membrane may have benefits for infants when infants are having breast milk from their mother. And so it's been known that these may have very important bioactive properties, but it hadn't really been studied in humans until more recent years. And so this randomized trial was done in about 60 overweight adults, and it compared 15% of calories from butter to 15% of calories from whipped cream given to these individuals for 8 weeks. And they were given this for breakfast to eat with jam and scones. So this is the kind of randomized trial I'd want to be in, right? You get to have whipped cream or butter with jam and scones for 8 weeks. What's really interesting is butter and whipped cream have identical fat, saturated fat, dietary cholesterol. All the macronutrients are exactly the same. Really what's different is the presence or absence of milk fat globule membrane. These active biomolecules are not present in butter, but they are present in whipped cream. And what the researchers found is that among individuals who are fed 15% of calories from butter for 8 weeks, their blood cholesterol levels all worsened in expected directions, worsening of LDL cholesterol and total cholesterol and ApoB levels. On the other hand, the individuals who ate the whipped cream, even though they had 15% of calories from whipped cream and the same amount of saturated fat and other fats, had no change at all in their blood cholesterol levels, no increase in the harmful LDL cholesterol, no increase at all in the harmful ApoB levels. And when they looked at the genetic function of these individuals, at least 19 genes were actively turned on or off by the milk fat globule membrane in the whipped cream. And so this again shows us that foods are very complicated, and these trace bioactives, even things like phospholipids and sphingolipids in certain dairy fats, can have powerful biologic effects. We also know that bioactives can alter our epigenetics. Epigenetics is the many processes by which genes are turned on and off in the cells, and we know these are influenced by the environment, by adverse things like smoking, and by positive things like physical activity. We know this alters our epigenetics. Well, more and more studies are showing that bioactives in food, like polyunsaturated fatty acids, certain microbiome-generated metabolites like butyrate, lycopene from tomatoes, vitamin E, coenzyme Q and selenium, alter our epigenetics. So, at the end of the day, we're just scratching the surface and starting to learn about bioactives. We know over the last 40 or 50 years, for the human race, we have greatly reduced our crop biodiversity, relying on monocropping of highly selected, mostly starch-rich crops like wheat and rice and corn. We've reduced our intake of healthful, minimally processed plant foods, which are rich in bioactives, including fermentable fibers, flavanols, all of these other compounds. We also have a rise in highly intensive, ultra-processed foods. This includes very high levels of refined carbohydrates, loss of prebiotics, loss of bioactives, and also additives like salt and sugar and emulsifiers and stabilizers that are harmful, and also food contaminants from packaging like endocrine disruptors like BPA and phthalates. And so we've sort of turned our healthy food system on its head, removing foods with these healthy bioactives and adding foods with additives which have negative effects on our bodies. The typical nutrition facts panel on a food package only lists about 10 nutritional compounds. The U.S. Department of Agriculture's Food Composition Database commonly lists the amounts of about 100 compounds in food. If you look at all the published scientific literature, there's maybe up to recent years had been 100,000 compounds identified in food. And so we knew of maybe 100,000 bioactives. But there's new research going on, new science going on, where now we know from some databases there are 2.2 million compounds now that have been identified in foods, and these compounds have been matched using artificial intelligence and machine learning to important biologic pathways in the body, which help us try to understand and predict what these compounds do. So I think we're just at the beginning of trying to understand and leverage the power of food as medicine to really improve our health, including through the power of these bioactives.